Mai Tran was not the kind of woman who walked into a room and turned every head. She was the one who sat in the corner of the open plan office, earbuds in, sketching UI wireframes on her laptop while the rest of the world hummed around her. Her colleagues at the Austin-based tech startup called her quiet, unassuming, reliable. She dressed in soft neutrals, cream glasses, camel sweaters, jeans that were always cut at exactly the same height. She wore minimal makeup and kept her long black hair in a low bun that never seemed to have a strand out of place. She smiled when people spoke to her, laughed politely at jokes she didn't quite hear, and returned to her screen with a focus so total it bordered on monastic. What her co-workers did not know was that beneath the soft wool cardigan and the meticulous low bun was a woman with a restless heart and a hunger she had spent most of her life trying to understand, and even longer trying to hide. She was 28 years old, a UI designer with a portfolio that spoke far louder than her voice. People often told her she resembled the actress who played the demure, bookish girl on that popular streaming drama, the one who always seemed so composed, so proper, so in control. Maya smiled politely when they said this. She never corrected them. The truth was far more complicated, far messier, far less respectable than that composed exterior suggested. Maya was not composed. She was only waiting for someone bold enough to crack the careful shell she had built around herself, someone patient enough to wait with her in the dark until she found the courage to let him in. Her life had never been easy, and she carried that history in her body like weather in a landscape, not visible every day, but shaping everything beneath the surface. Her father had died of a sudden cardiac event before she turned 1 year old, leaving her mother to raise a baby alone for 2 agonizing years before remarriage. Her stepfather was not cruel. Maya would have preferred if he had been, because cruelty at least is honest, but he was distant in the way that many men who are not a woman's biological father tend to be, cordial, responsible, fundamentally removed. He paid the bills. He attended her school plays and sat in the back row. He never hugged her, but he never yelled at her either. He existed in the peripheral vision of her childhood, a steady presence that offered protection without warmth, stability without love. Her mother, perhaps overwhelmed by the weight of 2 marriages and the slow death of her own dreams, had never quite learned how to show warmth. She expressed love through acts of service, dinner on the table, laundry folded and placed in the correct drawers, a report card signed with a small good and nothing more. Maya learned early that love was something you earned through performance, through being good and quiet and undemanding, through never asking for too much because asking too much was how you got disappointed. By the time Maya was 7, she had been sent to live with her paternal grandparents in a modest 2-story house in suburban Columbus, Ohio. Her mother and stepfather had relocated for his job, Portland, then San Jose, then back to Chicago, and each move seemed to leave less and less room for a daughter who was, with each passing year, becoming a more inconvenient reminder of a previous life. Her grandparents were kind. Her grandmother was a retired school teacher who smelled like lavender and kept a pristine garden out back where Maya would spend summer afternoons reading Nancy Drew novels under a magnolia tree. Her grandfather was a quiet man who had worked for 32 years at a Ford plant before early retirement, and who communicated his affection through the careful repair of broken things, bicycles, lamp switches, the kitchen faucet that always dripped. He fixed what was broken, and Maya watched him do it with a reverence that felt, in retrospect, like a form of prayer. They loved her. That was never in question. They fed her, clothed her, attended every school play and parent-teacher conference, and told her she was special every night before bed. Her grandmother brushed her hair each evening and told her stories about her father as a young man, his stubbornness, his humor, the way he used to sneak out of the house at dawn to go fishing even though he was allergic to most fish. These stories were Maya's most treasured inheritance, small golden coins she kept in a vault in her chest and examined when the world felt especially cold. But Maya still woke up some nights with an ache in her chest that no amount of grandmother's cooking could fix, no bedtime story could fill. It was not that she lacked love. It was that she lacked the specific flavor of love she had never tasted, the uncomplicated, unconditional devotion of parents to a child, the kind that exists only when a child can take a parent's presence for granted because it has never been absent. She had a hole inside her shaped like a parent's love, and no amount of patchwork, however warm, however genuine, had ever filled it completely. It was this emptiness, this original wound, that drove her, year after year, toward older men. Not dramatically older, just 4, 5, sometimes 6 years. Men who carried themselves with the quiet confidence of someone who had already survived things, who had been forged by experience into something solid and legible. Men who could hold her and make her feel, for a few hours or a few months or a few years, like she was not adrift in the world, not alone, not the little girl who kept waking up in the dark waiting for someone to come back. Daniel Wu entered her life on a cold February night in 2013, when she was 21 and deep into her sophomore year at Ohio State University, majoring in graphic design with a minor in psychology. He found her in a graphic design forums QQ group, yes, the old school kind, relics of a pre-Discord, pre-Slack era, and sent her a friend request with a message so simple and disarming that she read it 3 times before responding. Love your portfolio work. You have a poet's eye for composition. Maya clicked on his profile and found a goldmine. His posts were thoughtful, layered, sometimes achingly beautiful. He wrote about technology and its relationship to human behavior, about literature and the strange architecture of meaning, about the peculiar loneliness of living in a big American city and the even stranger loneliness of pretending you weren't lonely. There was a particular post, a poem, really, about a man sitting alone in a diner at 2 a.m., staring at a cup of coffee, waiting for someone who would never arrive. The poem had no title, and it ended with a line that Maya would carry in her memory for years. I have learned to love the waiting more than the arrival, because the waiting is where hope lives, and hope, unlike people, never lets you down. She read it 3 times in a row. Something about it made her chest tighten in a way she could not explain, a recognition, perhaps, of a kindred restlessness. She typed back a message, "You write like someone who has been hurt." He responded within minutes, at 1:47 a.m., as if he had been waiting by his screen for exactly this response, and you see that in 3 paragraphs. Impressive. Most people just say nice poem and move on. They talked every day for 6 months after that. Mornings, evenings, late nights when she should have been studying for finals. He was working as a junior software engineer at a growing tech firm in Austin, Texas, and she was still in Columbus, finishing her degree, working part-time at the campus bookstore and dreaming of a life that felt bigger than Ohio. He was funny and self-deprecating, with a dry wit that caught her off guard in the best possible way. He challenged her ideas about design, introduced her to new music, Bonnie Rare, Iron and Wine, the XX, sent her long articles about cognitive psychology and how it applied to user interface design, argued with her about whether skeuomorphism was dead or merely sleeping. She told him things she had never told anyone, about her father, about the slow emotional distance of her mother, about growing up with her grandparents and the strange grief of loving people who were already aging toward an end she could see coming. He never dismissed any of it. He listened, and then he responded with a depth and specificity that made her feel, for the first time in her life, truly heard. And in return, he told her about his own family. His father had been a volatile man, brilliant but unstable, prone to rages that his family walked on eggshells around. When Daniel was 14, his father had been involved in a bar fight that ended with another man dead on the kitchen floor. The trial was swift and the sentence was 15 years to life. His mother had remarried a kind but emotionally unavailable man who offered financial stability and no tenderness. Daniel had learned, at an early age, that men who expressed too much feeling were dangerous, and that men who expressed none were simply doing what men do. He had retreated into code and poetry, the former because it was legible and controllable, the latter because it was the only place where his chaos could take a beautiful shape. Maya recognized, even then, the way their injuries mirrored each other. Two people shaped by absence, reaching across a screen towards something neither could fully name. By the time the Memorial Day weekend rolled around in 2013, Bonnie, fragrant with honeysuckle and promise, they were both restless with anticipation. He took a 5-hour flight from Austin to Columbus. She met him at the arrivals gate with a hand-drawn sign that read "The Poet of the QQ Group," done in her best architectural sketch style, complete with a little decorative border. When she saw him walk through the arrivals gate, tall and lanky, 6'1", with thick-rimmed glasses and a nervous smile that flickered across his face like heat lightning, her heart performed a somersault she would later try and fail to recreate with anyone else. He was not classically handsome. His nose was too long, his jaw too narrow, his hair perpetually on the verge of chaos despite what Maya would later learn was a meticulous daily styling routine. But his eyes, dark brown, almost black, with a depth that seemed to go down and down like a well, were the most attentive eyes she had ever looked into. They looked at her like she was a problem he had been trying to solve his entire life and had finally, in this moment, at this airport gate, found the solution to. She would remember that look for the rest of her life. And she would spend years trying to get it back. She had booked him a room at the Marriott on High Street, a business-class hotel that was slightly above their combined budget, but that she insisted on because she wanted the first time, when it happened, to feel special. After he checked in, they walked to the room together, awkward and elated, dragging his roller bag between them, and sat on the edge of the bed in that strange liminal space that exists between the person you have been talking to for 6 months and the stranger you are meeting for the first time. The room smelled of lemon cleaner and industrial carpet. The curtains were half drawn against the afternoon sun. The air conditioning hummed with the particular frequency of hotel HVAC systems the world over, and outside, the sounds of Columbus traffic filtered up from High Street like the ocean heard from a great distance. He leaned in first. She pulled back, just half an inch, just enough to make him stop. "We should talk first," she whispered, her heart hammering so hard she was certain he could see her pulse jumping in her throat. He nodded, sat back, and smiled. He waited. And that patience, that willingness to pause when she asked, to respect the boundary she had drawn, was, in that moment, the most attractive thing she had ever experienced in a man. But Maya's patience was never as strong as her hunger. Within 20 minutes of conversation that felt like a first date distilled to its most electric essence, she had closed the gap herself. They made love for the first time on that Marriott bed, the curtains half drawn, the afternoon light filtering through in soft gold bars, the hum of the air conditioning filling the silence between their breaths. He was gentle, attentive, and communicative in a way that surprised her, checking in, asking questions, responding to her body with a sensitivity that she had not expected from someone who came across as so self-contained in his messages. She discovered something in herself that she had always suspected but never dared to name. She was not the quiet, demure girl people thought she was. Under the right hands, under the right attention, she came alive in ways that sometimes frightened her with their intensity. She was not passive in bed. She was demanding, hungry, curious. She wanted to try things she had only read about. She wanted to be touched in places she had never invited anyone to touch. And Daniel, quiet, cerebral Daniel, met every one of her desires with an eagerness that matched her own. He stayed 4 days. They spent every waking hour together, walking through the OSU campus and pretending to be tourists in a city she had lived in for 3 years, eating at the Thai restaurant on Lane Avenue that she had been going to since freshman year, lying in bed until noon talking about nothing and everything, their families, their fears, their secret theories about what made people fall in love and why love so often curdled into something else. When he left, she stood at the Columbus airport gate and cried, really cried, the ugly kind, the kind that in public restrooms, and he promised to call her as soon as he landed, and he did, even though it was 10 p.m. this time and he had to be at work in 7 hours. ## Part 2. The Austin Years, Love in the Time of Tech Startups. After graduation in May 2015, Maya moved to Austin without hesitation. She had job offers from 2 firms in Columbus, a marketing agency and a small product company, and she turned them both down without apology or explanation. Daniel met her at the bus station, not the airport, because he did not drive, and the bus fare was cheaper than parking, and they drove back to his apartment in his roommate's beat-up Honda Civic, holding hands in the front seat, the Texas heat pressing against the windows like a living thing, both of them grinning like idiots and pretending they weren't. Daniel's apartment was a 1-bedroom affair in a complex called the Trails at Barton Creek, which sounded far more romantic than it was. The complex was fine, clean, affordable, within walking distance of a Trader Joe's, but the apartment itself was a study in bachelor indifference, neutral walls, hand-me-down furniture from his roommate, a kitchen that had clearly never been used for anything more elaborate than microwave burritos. Maya did not care. She walked through the door with her 2 suitcases and felt, for the first time in her life, like she had arrived somewhere. They moved in together within a week. She did not tell her mother. They had not spoken in 3 months, a gap that had opened after a particularly brutal phone call during which Maya had accused her of never having truly wanted her, and her mother had responded with a silence that lasted so long Maya thought the call had dropped. Daniel did not ask her to tell her mother. He understood, in the way that only another person shaped by damage can understand, that some families are better left at a distance. Those first 3 years in Austin were, by any objective measure, the happiest of Maya's life. Daniel was working at a growing tech firm writing back-end code, and Maya was building a freelance career designing interfaces for apps and websites from her home office nook, a corner of the living room separated from the rest of the space by a bookshelf she had assembled herself, incorrectly, twice. Every morning, Daniel made coffee, strong, slightly burned, the way he liked it, and brought her a cup in bed at 7:15, 15 minutes before her alarm was set to go off, because he knew she liked to ease into consciousness gradually. They had a ritual, 15 minutes of silence together, her head on his shoulder, both of them scrolling through their phones in parallel, him reading tech news and design blogs, her on Instagram and Pinterest, saving UI inspiration to boards she would never actually use. Then he would head to the office. She would open her laptop and lose herself in the clean geometry of wireframes and color palettes and font pairings, and the day would begin. In the evenings, he cooked. He was surprisingly good at it, better than she had expected from a man who had grown up on frozen pizzas and instant ramen and the occasional miraculous attempt at beef stew that always seemed to be missing something essential. He made her a chicken tikka masala from scratch one Sunday that made her close her eyes and groan with a pleasure that had nothing to do with the food. She had it with garlic naan and basmati rice and a glass of the cheap red wine they both pretended to find sophisticated, and when she told him, in all sincerity, that it was the best meal she had ever eaten, he looked at her with an expression of such uncomplicated happiness that she had to look away because it was too much warmth, too much light, too much of the thing she had spent her whole life being afraid to want. After dinner, they washed dishes side by side, her hips bumping his in the narrow kitchen, and then they collapsed on the sofa and watched television, mostly design documentaries and cooking shows, sometimes trashy reality TV that they both pretended to hate but secretly loved, melding the dialogue along with the contestants. And then, inevitably, the evening would dissolve into the bedroom, where they explored each other with an urgency that felt, even after months and then years, like the first time, always slightly breathless, always slightly desperate, as if they both knew on some level that this thing they had was rare and fragile and would not last forever. They averaged 2 or 3 times a week, not a number Maya tracked consciously, but one that felt right, that filled her up, that made her feel anchored in her body and her life in a way nothing else had ever managed. In those moments, pressed against Daniel's warm chest, his breath in her ear, his hands tracing the architecture of her ribs and her spine and the sensitive hollow at the base of her throat, Maya felt the hole in her heart shrink to almost nothing. She thought, this is what it feels like to be loved properly. This is what I was made for. But there were cracks, even then, that Maya chose not to see. Daniel was, at his core, a passive man. Not passive in the sense of being weak or indecisive. He could make decisions when they were forced upon him, but passive in the deeper, more corrosive sense of someone who had learned, through the template of his childhood, that the worst thing a man could do was to act decisively and be wrong. His father's violence had not been the result of too much action. It had been the result of one catastrophic decision made in a moment of rage. Daniel had watched the consequences unfold, his father's arrest, the shame of the trial, his mother's forced remarriage, the slow erosion of everything he had known, and he had internalized a lesson that was almost impossible to unlearn, that for a man, stillness is safer than movement, silence is wiser than speech, and the worst thing you can do is to want something badly enough to fight for it. Maya discovered this in small ways at first. When she suggested they start saving for a house, Austin's real estate market was heating up, and every article she read warned that waiting was a fool's game. Daniel agreed in principle but never opened a savings account. When she pointed out, with increasing urgency, that their rent was rising and that buying a property would be smarter than continuing to pour money into a landlord's pocket, he nodded and said, "Yeah, we should think about that," and then did nothing. Not because he didn't care, but because the act of wanting something, of articulating a desire, of committing to a plan, of defending a vision of the future against the resistance of the present, felt, to him, like an invitation to disaster. Maya learned to translate his silences. His "we'll figure it out" was a wall. His "let's wait and see" was a retreat. His "I hear you" was a shutdown in disguise. She pushed because pushing was the only language she had ever known for love. Her grandmother pushed her toward piano lessons and good grades. Her mother pushed her toward being quiet and polite and undemanding. And Maya, who had learned from both women that love was something you negotiated for rather than something you received freely, had made pushing her primary mode of connection with the world. She pushed Daniel to save money. She pushed him to talk about their future. She pushed him to engage with her emotionally, to tell her what he was feeling, to meet her in the vulnerable places where she needed him most. And Daniel, who had spent his entire life retreating behind walls of silence when things got difficult, pushed back, not with words, not with actions, but with the quiet, implacable refusal to engage that would become, over the next several years, the defining feature of their marriage. In 2017, Maya found a property online, a new development in Phoenix, Arizona, that the listing described as an emerging market with unparalleled investment potential. The description was written in the breathless, hyperactive style of real estate copy that promises paradise on earth for $340,000, and Maya, who had been obsessively monitoring the Austin market for 2 years and watching prices climb beyond their reach, felt a desperate flutter of hope. She called the agent immediately. The agent said the units were selling fast, only 3 left in the first phase, and that the developer was offering a closing cost credit for purchases made within the week. Maya bought a plane ticket that same night. She called Daniel at work and told him to pack a bag. He resisted. She could hear it in his voice, the careful hesitation, the words he was choosing and discarding before settling on, "Babe, we really need to think about this. Phoenix isn't even on our short list. We can't just." But she was already in motion, the adrenaline of the chase carrying her forward like a riptide. She had been waiting for so long. She had been pushing and hoping and pushing again, and now there was a property, a real property with walls and a roof and a kitchen where she could make dinner for her family, and no one was going to take this from her. She dragged him to Phoenix. She showed him the model unit, all clean lines and beige carpet and recessed lighting, the kind of space that looks like everywhere and therefore nowhere, but that she saw, in her desperation, as possibility. She listened to the developer's pitch, a young man in a too-tight suit who spoke about return on investment and demographic trends and the coming wave of tech companies relocating to the Phoenix metro area. Daniel said nothing. He stood in the kitchen of the model home with his arms crossed, his jaw tight, his eyes scanning the room as if looking for an escape route. Maya held the salesperson's arm and nodded along to every claim, her eyes bright with the fever of acquisition. Maya made the decision without him. She signed the purchase agreement that evening in the developer's office, her hands steady, her heart racing. She and Daniel would split the down payment equally. He would take the mortgage. It was not ideal. The property was at the outer edge of their budget, and Phoenix was not Austin, was not home, was not the life they had talked about building. But Maya was seized by a desperate, almost pathological need to have something concrete, something she could point to and say, "This is ours. This is real." This did not dissolve into silence like everything else. Daniel signed the papers without argument. That, in retrospect, should have been the first red flag. A man who loved you, truly loved you, in the way that partnership requires, would have fought you on a bad decision, would have said, "This is a mistake and I need you to hear me, even if it hurts." Daniel signed his name and said nothing. He drove Maya to the airport the next morning, and on the way, she said, "Aren't you excited?" And he looked at her and said, "I'm tired," and she thought, foolishly, that he would come around. That the joy of ownership would soften him. That having something to protect together would make them a team again. She was wrong. Within 3 months, the joy of ownership had curdled into resentment. The property manager for the Phoenix unit was difficult to reach and slow to respond to maintenance requests. The HOA fees were higher than promised. The emerging market had shown no signs of emerging, and the unit, which Maya had imagined as a weekend retreat and then, when that proved impractical, as an investment property, sat vacant and generating expenses like a second job she had never applied for. Daniel grew quieter, not the comfortable silence of early love, but the weighted quiet of a man storing grievances in a jar in his chest, twisting the lid tighter every day. Maya felt the shift and reacted to it with the only tool she had, more pushing. She asked him why he was upset. He said he wasn't upset. She asked why he wasn't coming to bed until 2 a.m. He said he was studying. She asked why he didn't want to talk about their future anymore. He said there was nothing to talk about. She started arguments just to get a reaction, and he let her words land against them like stones dropped into deep water, rippling outward into nothing. The disturbance absorbed instantly by the vast, indifferent depth of his silence, while she drowned in the quiet that followed. One night in late October, Maya tried to initiate sex. She came to bed early, showered, put on the lavender silk robe he had bought her for her birthday, a gift he had selected with surprising thoughtfulness, remembering that she had once admired a similar one in a shop window, and slid under the covers near him. He was lying on his side, his back to her, the blue light of his phone screen illuminating his face in short, recurring flashes. She put a hand on his hip. He did not move. She pressed closer, her lips near his ear, and whispered, "Hey." "I'm tired," he said, without turning. She sat up. "You've been tired for 3 months." He put his phone down. The room went dark. He sighed, the sigh of a man who has been waiting for this conversation the way a prisoner waits for a verdict, and said nothing. Maya pulled the covers off him. The cold air hit his legs, and he still did not move. "Talk to me," she said. Her voice was shaking, and she hated it. He stared at the ceiling. She could see his profile in the faint light from the street lamp outside, the strong line of his nose, the shadows pooling beneath his eyes. He looked exhausted. He looked like a man who had been carrying something heavy for a very long time and had finally decided to put it down and let it crush him. She grabbed his arm. He did not resist, but he did not respond either. She shook him. She demanded. She cried, not the performative tears of manipulation, but the real, ugly tears of a woman who could feel her marriage dissolving like sugar in water and could not find the spoon. He lay there like a man waiting for a storm to pass, weathered and still. Nothing happened that night, or any night after, without Maya having to beg for it. Part 3, the baby and the silence that followed. It was during one of their worst stretches, a 6-week period in which they barely spoke beyond the logistics of who was buying groceries and whose turn it was to cook dinner, that Maya realized her period was late. She took a test on a Tuesday morning in October, sitting on the cold tile floor of their bathroom, and watched 2 pink lines appear almost immediately. She sat there for a full minute after the result confirmed itself, holding the stick in her hand, staring at the wall and thinking, everything has just changed. She showed it to Daniel over breakfast the next morning. He was eating a bowl of cereal, his usual, the kind with marshmallows that Maya found both endearing and slightly depressing, and she placed the test on the table in front of him like a document requiring a signature. He looked at the plastic stick for a long moment, his spoon suspended halfway between bowl and mouth, and then he said, "Okay." Not congratulations. Not are you sure. Not what do we do. Not this wasn't the plan. Not anything that resembled the explosion of emotion, fear, joy, panic, hope that Maya had imagined would accompany this moment. Just okay. Flat. Factual. Final. They married in November, quietly, at the Travis County Courthouse, because Maya was already showing and she did not want to explain anything to her mother, whose response would inevitably be a combination of disappointment and unsolicited advice delivered in a tone that suggested Maya had done something slightly embarrassing. Daniel wore a gray suit he had rented online from a service that sent you 3 options and let you return the ones that didn't fit. Maya wore a cream-colored dress that she ordered from Amazon with 2-day shipping, and which fit well enough that she didn't mind the slightly visible tan line on her finger where a ring should have been but wasn't, because neither of them had thought to buy rings. Their witnesses were 2 strangers who were getting married at the same time, a young couple from El Paso who spoke mostly Spanish and smiled with an ease that made Maya's chest ache with envy. The judge was a tired-looking woman in her 60s who said the words quickly and efficiently, as if she had done this 10,000 times and was no longer able to hear her own voice as anything other than white noise. When she pronounced them married, Daniel kissed Maya on the cheek. It was over in 15 minutes. Daniel's mother came to Austin for the ceremony and stayed for 2 days, complaining about the heat and the size of the apartment and the fact that Maya had not prepared a traditional Chinese tea ceremony. She left a check for $500 and a list of names that she believed would be appropriate for a grandchild, none of which Maya liked. Maya's mother did not come at all. She sent a text message that said, "Congratulations. I hope he makes you happy." It was the warmest thing she had ever said to her daughter in 31 years of half-hearted attempts at connection. The pregnancy was hard on Maya in ways she had not anticipated. Her company, a mid-sized software firm with 40 employees, a name that sounded like a personality disorder and an office that smelled perpetually of stale coffee, was renovating its open plant space, and the paint fumes and construction dust made her nauseous every day from 7 a.m. until approximately 3 p.m. She quit her job on the advice of her doctor, and suddenly found herself at home all day with nothing to do but think about the baby growing inside her and the husband who had become a stranger in their own bed. Daniel handled the finances alone now. He paid the mortgage on the Phoenix property and a rent on their Austin apartment, and Maya contributed what she could from freelance projects, which grew scarcer and less lucrative as her belly grew larger and her ability to concentrate shrunk to approximately 12 minutes at a time. They were not in crisis. Daniel earned enough to cover their expenses comfortably, but the financial pressure was a low hum beneath everything, a subsonic reminder that they were one unexpected expense away from the kind of trouble that ends marriages. Daniel grew more distant as the pregnancy progressed. He stopped asking how she felt, not out of cruelty, but because he had never known how to ask, and the pregnancy had stripped away the last of his already minimal social confidence, leaving him unable to do anything but retreat. He came home later and later, not because he was working overtime, but because, Maya suspected with a clarity that hurt, he could not bear the weight of the apartment's silence. He would sit at his laptop until midnight, sometimes 1 a.m., the click of his keyboard the only sound in a house that had once been full of music and laughter and the smell of cooking. Maya began to dread going home. She started taking long walks around Lady Bird Lake in the evenings, after Daniel had left for work and before the sun went down, pushing Lily in her stroller and walking at a pace that was just fast enough to make her heart race. She watched the bats dart between the bridges and the joggers pass by with their earbuds in and their own private soundtracks playing in their heads. She envied them. She envied everyone who seemed to be moving through the world with purpose and momentum, heading somewhere, building something, arriving somewhere, while she stood still, anchored to a pregnancy she had not planned and a marriage that was dissolving in slow motion. She confronted him. Of course she did. You could at least ask me how the baby is, she said one night, her voice cracking in a way she could not control. You could ask me how I'm feeling. You could come to one of my doctor's appointments. You could. I went to the first one, Daniel said. The first one was 4 months ago. He looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in weeks, his eyes meeting hers with a directness that she had been aching for and dreading in equal measure, and she saw something in his expression that frightened her. Not anger. Not even sadness. It was absence. The look of a man who had already left in every way that mattered and was simply waiting for his body to catch up, the way a diver hits the water long after the decision to jump has been made. Maya went to bed that night with a feeling in her chest that she could not name. It was not quite grief. It was not quite rage. It was something closer to the feeling you get in a dream when you are falling and the ground is coming up and you know, with absolute certainty, that the impact is inevitable. At 4 months pregnant, Maya flew back to Ohio to visit her grandparents. Daniel drove her to the Austin airport and let her out at the curb without walking her inside. You know where the gate is, he said, and kissed her on the forehead, a gesture so perfunctory, so mechanical, that it made her chest ache more than nothing at all. She did not cry until she was through security, sitting at her gate with her roller bag between her knees, watching the planes take off and thinking about the baby inside her and the man she had married and the life she had imagined and the vast, terrifying distance between all three. In Columbus, her grandmother made her comfort food, pot roast with carrots and potato, the kind her grandfather had loved before he died 3 years earlier of a stroke that took him in his sleep, and told her stories about Maya's father as a young man. He was stubborn, her grandmother said, smiling, her hand resting on Maya's belly where the baby was practicing somersaults. Stubborn as a mule and twice as stupid. But he loved your mother fiercely. And when you were born, oh, Maya, when you were born, he held you for 6 hours straight. He wouldn't let anyone else hold you. He just sat in that hospital chair and stared at you like you were the most miraculous thing he had ever seen. Maya cried for an hour that night, alone in her childhood bedroom with its faded wallpaper and the Nancy Drew book still lined up on the shelf, and when she called Daniel to tell him she loved him, he said, "Okay, honey. Get some rest," and hung up. At 5 months, Maya returned to Austin. Daniel did not pick her up at the airport. He said he had a work deadline. She took the train home and found him at his computer, playing a strategy game, and stood in the doorway for a full minute before he noticed her. When he looked up, she said, "I think we should talk about the baby." "About what?" he said. About everything. About us." He removed his headphones slowly, as if doing so required great physical effort. "What about us?" She told him she was thinking about the delivery, about the first few months, about whether his mother could come to help, about daycare. He listened in silence, nodding occasionally, and when she finished, he said, "We'll figure it out." "We always say that," Maya said. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, older, harder, like a recording of someone she used to know. "And we never do." He stared at her. She stared at him. And then, in a moment that surprised them both, a moment that neither of them would fully understand or be able to explain in the months and years that followed, she slapped him. Open palm across the left cheek. It was not hard. She was not a violent woman, had never been a violent woman, had spent her entire life avoiding conflict the way other people avoid spiders, but the sound of it cracked through the apartment like a gunshot. Daniel's glasses flew slightly askew. He did not move. He did not reach for her. He sat there with his face turned to the side, the red mark blooming slowly on his cheekbone, and when he finally turned back, his expression had not changed. The absence was still there. Whatever she had been looking for, anger, hurt, a reaction, anything that would confirm he was still in this marriage and not just haunting it, it was not in that face. "I think you should go lie down," Daniel said calmly. Maya went to the bedroom and locked the door and sobbed until she could not breathe, and when Lily kicked against her hand from the inside, she pressed her palm flat against the spot and whispered, "I will never leave you. I will never not come when you need me. I will never be this quiet." She did not know yet that she was making a promise she would struggle to keep. Part 4, the birth and the long dark that followed. Their daughter, Lily, was born in April on a rainy Thursday night at St. David's Medical Center in Austin. The labor had lasted 14 hours, long enough for Maya to cycle through every form of pain the human body is capable of producing, and several she was certain had not been previously documented, and Daniel had been there through all of it, holding her hand, breathing with her through the contractions, occasionally making jokes that were not funny but that she appreciated for the effort. Lily was placed on Maya's chest immediately after birth, a small, slick, squalling creature with a face like an angry alien and fists like tiny, determined weapons. She was the most beautiful thing Maya had ever seen. Daniel stood beside the hospital bed and looked down at his daughter with an expression of terrified wonder that made Maya fall in love with him all over again, for approximately 48 hours. Those 48 hours in the hospital were a bubble, a perfect, sealed environment in which the three of them existed in a state of suspended animation, insulated from the world and its demands. The nurses came in and out at regular intervals, adjusting IVs, checking vitals, bringing Maya toast and apple juice and asking if she needed anything. Daniel was gentle with Maya, attentive in a way he had not been for months, helpful in a way that suggested he was finally allowing himself to feel the enormity of what had just happened. He brought her water without being asked. He let her sleep while the nurses came in and out. When Lily cried at 3 a.m., he was the one who got up every time, carrying the baby to the rocking chair by the window and walking her up and down until she quieted. Maya watched him from the bed, his tall frame silhouetted against the city lights outside, Lily's small head tucked under his chin, and she thought, this is who he is. This is who we are. But the hospital was a bubble, and when they went home, the bubble burst. Daniel's mother came to stay for 2 weeks to help with the baby. She was a stern, practical woman from Chengdu who had moved to Seattle after her second husband found work at a shipping company there, and who spoke limited English and had strong, inflexible opinions about everything: how the baby should be swaddled tighter, what temperature the apartment should be kept at, warmer, why Maya should not eat spicy food while breastfeeding. It would give the baby gas, a claim Maya's OB had explicitly debunked. Maya endured it for 14 days, cooking separate meals, wearing a sweater indoors because her mother-in-law insisted the baby needed warmth more than fresh air, listening to unsolicited advice about the correct way to hold a newborn, and then drove her to the airport herself, holding back tears until she got back to the car and could press her forehead against the steering wheel and breathe. And then she was alone with the baby, all day, every day, in an apartment that had begun to feel less like a home and more like a waiting room for something that would never arrive. Daniel went back to work. He was more physically present in the evenings than he had been during the pregnancy. He ate dinner with them most nights, and even bathed Lily a few times with a gentleness that Maya found both touching and almost unbearable, because it reminded her of who he had been before the silence had swallowed him whole. But the emotional distance Maya had felt for years, for as long as she could remember, really, if she was being honest with herself, had widened into a chasm that she could not see the bottom of. He still did not touch her. Not her shoulder. Not her hand. Not her face. When she reached for him in bed at night, not for sex, just for the simple animal comfort of another body's warmth pressed against her own, he rolled away. When she wore something nice, a dress she had bought before the pregnancy, which no longer fit quite right over her still soft postpartum belly but which she squeezed into anyway because she needed to feel like herself again, he did not notice. She started to feel like a ghost haunting her own life, visible but not seen, present but not real, slowly fading into the wallpaper of her own domestic existence. The lack of physical intimacy was the cruelest part. Maya was 28 years old, healthy, with a body that had only recently performed one of the most extraordinary acts of creation the human organism is capable of. She was not asking for acrobatic sex. She was not expecting the fevered urgency of their married room or the exploratory hunger of those early Austin years. She was asking to be held, to be kissed, to feel like a woman and not just a mother, to be seen as a body with desires and not merely a vessel for the next generation's needs. And Daniel, who had once couldn't keep his hands off her in that hotel room in Columbus, who had once reached for her in the kitchen while dinner was on the stove and the wine was breathing and the world outside felt far away, that same Daniel now lay beside her like a stone, like a man who had already grieved her and moved on and was simply waiting for the lease to expire. 6 weeks after Lily's birth, Maya approached the subject. She chose a Sunday afternoon when Lily was napping in her bassinet and Daniel was reading a technical book on the couch, a brick of a thing about distributed systems that he had been working through for 3 months without finishing. "We need to talk about us," she said, sitting beside him. "About our physical relationship." Daniel looked up. "What about it? When was the last time we were intimate?" He was quiet for a moment, the particular quality of Daniel's quiet, which was not contemplation but evacuation. The moment when he retreated behind the walls and waited for the storm to pass on its own. "I don't know," he said. "Before the baby," Maya said. "And that was, Daniel, that was almost a year ago." He closed the book. "Maya, I'm tired. I work all day. The baby cries at night. I don't have the energy for this." "I'm not talking about energy. I'm talking about connection. I'm talking about feeling like your wife and not your roommate." He sighed, a long, slow exhale that carried within it the accumulated weight of every conversation they had ever had about his emotional unavailability, every push she had made and every silence he had offered in return. "What do you want me to say?" "I want you to tell me what's going on. Why you pulled away. Why you don't," her voice caught. She pressed her lips together and started again. "Why you don't want me anymore." "Maya." He said her name the way a doctor delivers a terminal diagnosis, flat, factual, with a faint undercurrent of clinical detachment. "I still love you. I'm just tired. Can we please not do this right now?" They did not do it right then. But they did it again 2 weeks later. Maya initiated, Daniel complied, and it was, without exaggeration, the most mechanical sexual experience of Maya's life. There was no passion, no tenderness, no eye contact, no whispered words, no the small sounds that had once been her favorite part, the involuntary gasps and sighs that proved she was affecting him as deeply as he was affecting her. He finished, rolled over, and was asleep within 3 minutes. Maya lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling and thought, "This is my life now. This is what I signed up for. This is the rest of my life." She tried again 2 weeks later. He said no. She tried the week after that. He said he had a headache. She stopped trying after that, not because she had made peace with the situation, not because she had accepted it, but because the rejection was destroying something inside her that she needed in order to function. A river needs its banks to know where to flow. 3 months passed. Then 4. Maya stopped wearing the silk robe. She stopped putting on makeup in the morning, not because she had given up on herself, but because there was no one to see it, no one to appreciate it, no one whose attention she was trying to catch. She caught sight of herself in the bathroom mirror one morning, dark circles under her eyes, hair pulled back in a messy knot, a milk stain on her shirt, the shadow of her former self barely visible beneath the exhaustion and the new mom haze, and did not recognize the woman looking back at her. And yet the desire did not go away. It was there, coiled at the base of her spine, patient and persistent and increasingly angry. She touched herself in the shower in mornings when Lily was napping, and the orgasm, when it came, was satisfying in the way that popping a blister is satisfying, relief from pressure, but no real pleasure, no feeling of completion, just a brief chemical reset followed immediately by the return of the ache. She began to fantasize. At first, it was about Daniel, about the man he had been in those first years, the one who had written poetry and sent her messages at midnight and couldn't keep his hands off her in the Marriott room. She would lie awake at 2 a.m. and reconstruct those early encounters in her memory with a fidelity that hurt, replaying his hands, his mouth, the sound of his breathing, the weight of his body on hers. And then, slowly, inevitably, the fantasies shifted. They became about other men, about the handsome project manager at the coffee shop where she sometimes took Lily in the afternoons, the one who always remembered her order and always smiled a little too long when he handed her the cup. About the personal trainer at the gym she had joined and quit twice, a gruff former Marine named Derek who called her ma'am and made her do burpees until her vision went white. About strangers on the street who looked at her with something that might have been interest or might have been nothing at all. And then there were the 2 men from the online design community she had been part of for 4 years, a Facebook group for UI/UX designers called Pixel and Process, where members shared work, asked for feedback, and occasionally, in the private messages and late-night comment threads, crossed the line into territory that was decidedly not professional. One of them, a man named Ryan from Denver, was married with 2 children and a wife who, from what he had described in moments of unguarded honesty, had lost interest in everything about their marriage, including, perhaps especially, intimacy. He flirted with Maya openly in the group, commenting on her designs with emojis that were more suggestive than encouraging, replying to her posts at 11 p.m. with messages that began as critiques and ended as something else entirely. He had a good job, a good income, a self-deprecating humor that she found genuinely funny, and a way of asking, "How are you really doing?" that felt, the first time he asked it, like a hand reaching through a screen and touching her face. The other, a younger man named Chris from Portland, had recently broken up with his long-term girlfriend and was rebuilding his social life one online community at a time. He was 26, 7 years younger than Maya, with a kind of earnest, wide-eyed enthusiasm that she found both refreshing and, in the context of what she was beginning to want, almost painful in its innocence. He looked at her portfolio with genuine admiration. He asked her questions about her career. He told her she was talented. He did not, yet, flirt with her, but there was a current beneath his professional politeness that she could feel, the way you can feel the hum of a live wire behind a wall without seeing it. Both had, at various points, made comments that suggested they would be happy to help Maya with whatever she was missing at home. Nothing explicit, nothing she could point to and say, "That is sexual harassment," but the subtext was clear, and Maya found herself returning to their messages again and again, not because she was naive enough to think that helping was all they meant, but because even the possibility of being wanted, of being looked at with desire by someone who was not her husband, was enough to make her feel, for a few moments, like she was still alive. Maya had not met either of them in person. She had not exchanged phone numbers. She had not sent photos or engaged in explicitly sexual conversation. But she had flirted back. She had liked their comments with an enthusiasm that was, in retrospect, a form of confession. She had, on 2 occasions, stayed up late after Lily went to sleep and chatted with Ryan in the group DMs until 2 a.m., sharing frustrations about work and marriage and the strange loneliness of being a young mother in a world that seemed to have moved on without her. And she had felt, for the first time in months, perhaps the first time since Lily was born, alive. One evening, after putting Lily to bed and sitting in the dark living room with only the glow of her phone for company, Maya opened the Facebook group on her phone and navigated to her DMs with Ryan. He had sent her a message that afternoon. She had been avoiding opening it for 6 hours, the way you avoid opening a medical bill or a text from someone who hurt you, and when she finally read it, her breath caught in her throat. *K Maya. I've been thinking about you. Not in a weird way. Just, I hope you're doing okay. You seem like you're carrying a lot. If you ever need someone to talk to, really talk to, not just the polite stuff, I'm here. She stared at the message for a long time. She thought about Daniel, asleep in the bedroom with his back to the wall and his phone on the nightstand, a man she loved and who she was no longer certain loved her back. She thought about Lily, 6 months old now, in the next room, making small sleeping sounds in her crib, the soft, rhythmic breathing of a creature who had no idea that the world was complicated and that the woman who loved her most was slowly coming apart. She thought about the life she had imagined for herself when she was 21 and sitting in that married room in Columbus, Daniel's arms around her, the future stretching out ahead like an open highway. She closed the app. She put the phone down. She sat in the dark for 10 minutes, breathing. Then she picked up the phone again. #epilogue, the crossroads. Maya did not reply to Ryan that night, or the next night, or the night after that. She went through the motions of new motherhood with a competence that surprised her, feeding, soothing, playing with Lily on the playmat, taking her to the pediatrician for her 6-month checkup, posting adorable photos on Instagram with filters that smoothed out the dark circles under her eyes and the exhaustion etched into her jawline. She cooked dinner for Daniel when he came home. She asked about his day. She listened to his answers, which ranged from monosyllabic to non-existent. But something had shifted. She had seen, in the unflinching light of her own hunger, exactly who she was becoming. A woman who loved her husband but could not reach him. A mother who cherished her daughter but was being slowly hollowed out by the absence of adult intimacy. Not just sex, but eye contact, conversation, the particular electricity of being seen by someone who wanted to see you. A person with a body that still burned with desire and a heart that had no one to receive it, no one to honor it, no one to meet her in the place where her need lived and say, I feel it too. I want you too. Come here. She was standing at a crossroads in her life. The kind of crossroads that does not announce itself with a sign or a dramatic turning point, but that reveals itself gradually, in the quiet spaces between one day and the next, as a woman slowly wakes up to the fact that the road she is on is not the road she wanted and that she has been walking it for so long she no longer remembers how to step off. She did not know what would happen next. She did not know if Daniel would ever come back to her, or if Ryan's message was the first domino in a cascade she could not stop. She did not know if she was strong enough to demand the marriage she needed, the intimacy, the passion, the emotional presence, or brave enough to walk away from the one she had, to choose for herself what she had spent her whole life being taught not to choose. But she knew, for the first time in a very long time, that she was going to find out. Not by accident. Not by waiting for Daniel to change, or for Ryan to offer an escape, or for the universe to intervene with a convenient miracle. She was going to find out by asking for what she wanted, loudly, clearly, without apology, and then watching to see who showed up. She wrote in her journal that night, after Lily woke up for her 3 a.m. feeding and Daniel slept through it as he always did, as she had known he would. I love my husband. I love my daughter. But I am disappearing. I can feel myself going, not all at once, but in small ways, every day. Less energy. Less desire to try. Less belief that things can get better. And I don't know if I can find myself again if I keep pretending this is enough. Something has to change. And since he won't change it, I suppose I have to be the one. She did not know yet what that would mean. She did not know if it would mean counseling, or confrontation, or the slow, painful work of rebuilding what had been broken. She did not know if it would mean Ryan, or Chris, or no one at all. She only knew that she was done being silent. She was done being the girl who waited and hoped and pushed against silence until she broke, only to be met with more silence. She was done being quiet. This has been story 9 from Noah's Awakening, where midlife love stories aren't quiet, and neither are the women living them. Part 6, The Long Walk Home. The weeks after Maya's decision not to reply to Ryan's message were the longest of her life. Every morning she woke up and the first thing she felt was the weight of the choice she had not yet made, the invisible fork in the road that she could see but not step off, the life she was living and the life she was imagining, the woman she had been and the woman she was becoming. She went through the motions of new motherhood with a competence that surprised her, feeding Lily every 3 hours, tracking her milestones with the obsessive attention of a first-time parent, posting photos to Instagram with filters that smoothed out the exhaustion and made the colors slightly too bright. She cooked dinner for Daniel when he came home. She asked about his day. She listened to his answers, which ranged from monosyllabic to non-existent, and she did not push, did not demand, did not start the arguments she had used, for years, as her primary mode of connection. She was, outwardly, the model of a patient, understanding wife. Inside, she was a hurricane. She started taking long walks in the evenings, after Daniel had retreated to his computer and the apartment had settled into its familiar nighttime silence. She would put Lily in the carrier and walk the neighborhood, the same streets she had walked 1,000 times, past the coffee shop and the dry cleaner and the little park with the rusted playground equipment that no one ever used, and she would think. She thought about her grandmother in Ohio, who had been married to her grandfather for 43 years and who had told Maya once, on a visit when Maya was 16 and confused about a boy at school, "Marriage is not the fire, sweetheart. The fire burns out. Marriage is what you build in the ashes." She thought about what she had built in the ashes of her own fire. She thought about the condo in Phoenix that was eating up $1,400 a month in mortgage payments and sitting empty, a monument to a fight she could not remember starting. She thought about the IT job Daniel had been passed over for twice, the promotion he never pushed for, the salary that never seemed to grow no matter how hard they tried to pretend it would. She thought about the life she had imagined when she was 21 and sitting in that married room in Columbus, Daniel's arms around her, the future stretching out ahead like an open highway. That future had looked so bright, so possible. She had believed, with the uncomplicated certainty of a 21-year-old, that love was enough, that if two people wanted each other badly enough, they could build anything. And maybe that was true. Maybe two people who wanted each other could build anything. But what if one of the people stopped wanting? What if the wanting, on one side, calcified into routine, and the other side spent years reaching across the growing distance and coming back with nothing but air? Was it her fault? She asked herself this question every night on the walks, turning it over like a stone in her hand. Was she too much? Too demanding? Too hungry for a kind of attention that most men, that Daniel, specifically, were not built to provide? She thought about her mother, who had never wanted her, and she thought about Daniel, who had once wanted her so badly he flew 5 hours to meet her, and she thought about the distance between those two facts and how it had swallowed her whole. She did not know the answer. She suspected there was no answer, only the choice, the same choice she had been circling for months, to stay and keep pretending, or to leave and find out who she was on the other side. On the walk back from the park one evening in December, 3 weeks after her night of decision in the Phoenix hotel room, Maya passed a woman she vaguely recognized from the apartment complex, a young mother, maybe 30, with a toddler on her hip and a stroller with a newborn in it. The woman was talking on her phone, her voice low, private, and Maya caught a fragment of she passed, "I just don't know if I can do this anymore. Every day. The same thing. He comes home and he doesn't see me. I could disappear and he wouldn't notice for a week." Maya walked 10 more steps before she stopped. She stood on the sidewalk, Lily warm against her chest in the carrier, and she felt something crack open in her, not breaking, but opening, the way a seed opens when it is time to grow. She was not alone. That was the thing she had forgotten, in the long months of isolation and the slow suffocation of her marriage. She was not the only woman standing on a sidewalk at 7 p.m. on a Tuesday, holding a sleeping baby, feeling like she was disappearing. There were thousands of her. Millions. Women all over the country, all over the world, who had married men who had once looked at them like they were miracles and now looked through them like they were furniture. Women who had made the choice to stay, and women who had made the choice to go, and women who were standing on sidewalks right now trying to figure out which choice to make. She went home. She fed Lily. She put her to bed, Daniel was at his computer, as always, the blue light of his monitor casting shadows across his face. She stood in the doorway of his office for a moment, watching him, the familiar slope of his shoulders, the way he leaned forward when he was concentrating, the small gestures of his hands on the keyboard that she had memorized in the years of watching him work. She loved him. She was certain of this. She loved him the way you love someone who is part of your history, permanently, irreversibly, in a way that cannot be undone by therapy or distance or the slow erosion of intimacy. He was the father of her child. He was the man she had chosen, at 21, to build a life with. And he was not capable, she had finally accepted, of being the partner she needed. That was not his fault. It was not her fault either. It was just a fact, a structural flaw in the foundation of their relationship that could not be fixed by good intentions or couples therapy or the desperate, grasping hope that things would change if she just waited long enough. She went to bed. She did not sleep. At 2 a.m., she picked up her phone from the nightstand and opened the Facebook group and found Ryan's message, still there, still waiting, unchanged by the weeks that had passed since he sent it. She typed, "I'm done waiting." She sent it before she could change her mind. Part 7, the version of herself she left behind. The woman who walked out of the Austin apartment 3 months later was not the same woman who had walked in 3 years earlier. That woman, the one who had arrived on Daniel's doorstep with 2 suitcases and a heart full of hope, had believed that love was a choice she made once and then kept making, every day, in the small decisions and the daily acts of attention and care. She had believed that passion was renewable, that desire could be maintained, that the fire that burned between 2 people at the beginning of a love story could be banked and sustained for a lifetime if both people were willing to tend it. That woman had been wrong. Not entirely, not about everything, but about the central premise of her faith. Love was a choice. But it was not only a choice. It was also a fact, a physical reality, something that lived in the body and had requirements and could die if those requirements were not met. And Maya's body had been starving for 3 years, and she had ignored the starvation, had told herself it was not real, had tried to survive on the crumbs of Daniel's occasional attention, and the ignoring had almost killed something essential in her. She left on a Saturday morning in March. Daniel was at a work offsite, a team-building retreat in Dripping Springs that he had been looking forward to for weeks, the kind of dull corporate event that he would ordinarily have dreaded but that he had been almost eager to attend because it meant 2 nights away from the tension of the apartment. Maya had chosen the timing deliberately. She did not want to make a scene. She did not want to argue. She wanted a clean break, the kind of break that felt, as much as possible, like an agreement rather than a defeat. She packed her bags and Lily's bags and she loaded them into the Honda Civic that she had bought with her freelance savings 2 months earlier, a decision Daniel had not commented on, because by then he had stopped commenting on anything that was not directly related to his work. She left a note on the kitchen table. She did not write a long letter explaining herself. She wrote 3 sentences. Daniel, I love you. But I can't do this anymore. Please take care of yourself. She drove to her friend Keisha's apartment in North Austin and she cried for 2 hours in Keisha's guest room while Lily slept in the pack and play and Keisha made tea and did not ask questions. And when she was done crying, she lay on the bed and stared at the ceiling and felt, for the first time in years, something she had forgotten, the sensation of relief. Not complete relief. There was guilt, profound, echoing guilt, about what she was doing to Lily, about the family she was dismantling, about the man she was leaving behind. There was fear, vast, formless fear, about how she would support herself, how she would find daycare, how she would rebuild a life from scratch at 28 with a baby and no savings and a career that had been on hold for 2 years. There was grief, the particular grief of ending something that had once been beautiful, for the marriage she had imagined and the life she had believed she was building. But underneath all of that, underneath the guilt and the fear and the grief, there was relief. A body-deep, cellular relief. The relief of a woman who had finally stopped pretending and started living. She did not contact Ryan. She did not, in the first month, contact anyone. She spent the summer figuring out who she was, Maya alone, Maya unaccompanied, Maya without a husband to orbit or a marriage to maintain or a Daniel to push against. She got a job at a tech startup in South Congress, a product design firm with 12 employees and a casual, creative culture that felt nothing like the sterile corporate environments she had worked in before. She found a daycare for Lily, an in-home provider named Rosa who had 3 kids of her own and a backyard with a sandbox, and who sent Maya photos of Lily every day at noon, just because she thought Maya would like to see her daughter laughing in the Texas sun. She was, by every external measure, starting over. And it was hard, brutally, exhaustingly hard, the kind of hard that does not let up for months and sometimes years, but it was also the kind of hard that felt, in a way her marriage had not felt in a very long time, like it was hers. Like she had chosen it. Like every difficult thing about it was a direct consequence of a decision she had made for herself, and not a burden she had inherited from someone else's inability to meet her halfway. One evening in September, 5 months after she left, Maya was putting Lily to bed, the same ritual, the same 3 songs, the same darkness, when her phone buzzed. The text from an unknown number. She opened it. *K. It's Ryan. I got your number from the group admin. I hope that's okay. I just wanted to say, I'm proud of you. For choosing yourself. Whatever you need, I'm here. Maya read the message 3 times. She looked at Lily, asleep in her crib, her face soft with the particular peace of a baby who has never doubted that she is loved. She looked at the small apartment, the second-hand furniture, the boxes she had not yet unpacked, the evidence of a life in transition, and she thought about the version of herself she had left behind. The woman who stayed too long. The woman who apologized for her own hunger. The woman who had believed, until the very end, that if she just tried harder, asked more gently, pushed more patiently, something would change. She typed back, *thank you. I'm not ready to see you. But I'm glad you exist, *. She meant it. Not as an invitation, not yet, maybe not ever, but as a fact. Ryan existed. He was a man who had seen her, briefly, in the most honest version of herself, and who had not judged her for what he saw.
And
a mobile app for a startup in San Francisco, and when she was done, she closed the laptop and sat in the dark apartment and felt something that she had not felt in years, maybe ever, ownership. Of her life. Of her choices. Of the woman she was becoming. She was going to be okay. She did not know what that meant, exactly. Okay was not a destination, it was a direction, and she was still learning how to walk in it, but she was moving. And that, for now, was everything. Part 8, the reckoning she owes herself. There is a particular kind of reckoning that every woman who has ever stayed too long in a marriage eventually has to conduct. It is not the reckoning with the husband, that comes later, if it comes at all, in the form of conversations and negotiations and the slow, painstaking work of separation or reconciliation. The reckoning I am talking about is the one with yourself. The inventory of your own complicity. The honest accounting of the moments when you could have spoken and did not, when you could have demanded and did not, when you chose silence because silence felt safer than the truth, and then spent years pretending that the silence was the same as peace. Maya conducted this reckoning on a Sunday afternoon in October, 6 months after leaving Daniel, while Lily was napping in her crib and the apartment was quiet in the particular way that apartments are quiet when a baby is sleeping. A hell-breath silence, a suspended animation silence, the silence of a world paused. She sat on the living room floor with her laptop and a notebook, and she made 2 lists. On the left side, every moment she could remember when she had asked Daniel for something: attention, intimacy, change, and he had failed to deliver, and she had told herself it was fine, it was not that bad, she was overreacting, she should be grateful. On the right side, every moment she could remember when she had chosen not to ask, when she had swallowed the question or the complaint or the plea because asking felt too risky, too needy, too likely to trigger the silence that she feared more than the dissatisfaction. The left side was long. The right side was longer. This was the part she had not wanted to look at, the part that was harder to look at than Daniel's failures, because it was hers. She had spent years in that marriage telling herself that she was the victim of his passivity, his emotional unavailability, his inability to meet her halfway. And she had been a victim. She did not retract that, but she had also been a participant. She had enabled. She had accommodated. She had made herself smaller and quieter and less demanding in order to avoid the confrontation that she knew would end in silence anyway. And she had done it because the silence, however painful, was familiar, and familiarity had become her substitute for safety. She wrote in the notebook, I did not leave because he was incapable of loving me. I left because I was incapable of asking to be loved. She stared at the sentence for a long time. It was not the whole truth. It was never the whole truth, with people, because people are not single sentences, but it was a true, and it was one she had spent years avoiding because it was more painful than blaming Daniel for everything. Blame was easy. Blame was a place to put the pain so you did not have to feel it. But accountability, the willingness to look at your own hands and see them in the mess, not just as the hands that had been hurt but also as the hands that had, in small ways and large ones, participated in your own diminishment, that was the harder thing. And she had finally done it. She did not know what it meant for her future. She did not know if she would ever be able to ask for what she needed in a relationship, not just in romantic relationships, but in friendships, in professional relationships, in the 1,000 small transactions of daily life that required women, more than men, to suppress their own needs in order to maintain the peace. She did not know if the therapy she had started, twice a week with a therapist named Dr. Aditi Sharma, an Indian-American woman in her 50s with a calm voice and an unsettling ability to see through Maya's most carefully constructed defenses, would be enough to undo the patterns she had spent 28 years building. But she knew, for the first time, what the problem was. And she knew that knowing was the beginning of something. Not the end. The beginning. #epilogue, the version of the story she tells herself now. 2 years after leaving Daniel, Maya was sitting in a coffee shop on South Congress Avenue on a Saturday morning, Lily in a high chair beside her, a cold brew and a croissant on the table, when she overheard 2 women at the next table talking. One was telling the other about her marriage, the familiar story, the one Maya knew by heart, the husband who worked all the time, who didn't notice her anymore, who couldn't talk about feelings if his life depended on it. The woman telling the story sounded exhausted. She sounded resigned. She sounded like Maya had sounded 2 years ago, before the Phoenix hotel room and the Facebook message and the slow, agonizing, necessary work of dismantling a life that was no longer working. Maya listened for a few minutes without meaning to. Then she turned to the woman and said, gently, carefully, the way you speak to someone standing at the edge of something they have not yet decided to jump. Asterisk, can I tell you something? Not as advice. Just as a story, asterisk. The woman looked up. She was maybe 35, Maya guessed. Tired eyes. A wedding ring that she was twisting unconsciously around her finger. I stayed too long, Maya said. Asterisk, I stayed because I thought if I just tried harder, asked more gently, pushed more patiently, if I just found the right words, something would change. And the staying nearly destroyed me. And then I left. And the leaving was the hardest thing I'd ever done. And it was also the beginning of the rest of my life, asterisk. The woman stared at her. She did not say anything. But her eyes, Maya saw this clearly, filled with something that might have been recognition. The look of a person who has just heard their own interior life spoken aloud by a stranger and who does not know whether to feel relieved or terrified. Maya turned back to her coffee. She did not offer advice. She did not tell the woman what to do. She just told her own story, the only story she had, and trusted that the telling was enough. Lily banged her fist on the high chair tray and said, with the particular authority of a 2-year-old discovering language, "More muffin." Maya laughed. She broke off a piece of croissant and gave it to her daughter and watched her eat it with the focused intensity of a person who has never in her life been distracted by the question of whether someone loves her. That, Maya thought, was the thing she had wanted to give Lily more than anything else. Not a father. Not a family structure. Not the nuclear family fantasy that she had grown up dreaming about and had spent 3 years trying to recreate and had finally accepted was not going to happen in the shape she had imagined. What she wanted to give Lily was the knowledge, bone deep, cellular, inarguable, that she was wanted. That her needs were real and valid and deserved to be met. That she never, ever had to apologize for asking to be loved. Whether Maya would succeed in giving her that was, of course, an open question. Parenting was nothing if not a series of open questions, a decades-long negotiation between the person you wanted to be and the person you were capable of being, conducted in the presence of a small, demanding, completely honest third party who had no interest in your excuses or your justifications. But she was trying. And for now, for this Saturday morning in a coffee shop in Austin, Texas, with the sun coming through the windows and her daughter eating croissant and the woman at the next table still sitting with the story Maya had told her, that was enough. Asterisk. This has been story 9 from Noah's Awakening, for every woman who has ever stayed too long, and every woman who has found the courage to leave. ## author's note, the unbearable weight of wanting. Maya Chun's story is not a unique one. It is playing out, in some variation, in living rooms and bedrooms and kitchen tables across America, right now, at this very moment. A woman lies beside a man she loves and feels nothing. A man lies beside a woman he loves and does not know how to reach her. 2 people share a bed and a mortgage and a child and a life, and, somewhere in the middle of all that shared infrastructure, a vast and growing silence. This is not a story about infidelity. It is not a story about whether Maya was right to leave Daniel or right to want what she wanted or right to find, in the arms of a stranger in a Phoenix hotel room, the validation she could not get from her husband. It is a story about hunger. About the hunger of a woman who spent her entire life being told that her hunger was too much, too demanding, too needy, too unseemly, and who finally decided, after years of suppression, that she was done apologizing for wanting to be wanted. The tragedy of Maya and Daniel's marriage was not that they were bad people. It was that they were 2 people who could not meet each other, not because they did not try, but because they did not know how. Daniel did not know how to reach for Maya because he had never been taught that reaching was safe. Maya did not know how to ask for what she needed because she had spent her entire childhood learning that asking was futile. They were two damaged people who had found each other and loved each other genuinely and tried to build a life together and failed, not because they were not enough for each other, but because the shapes of their damage did not fit together in a way that allowed them to grow. Maya left. That was her choice. It was not the right choice. There is no right choice. In these situations, only the choice you make when you have exhausted all the other options and are standing in the wreckage of your own life, deciding what to do next. She left, and she rebuilt, and she learned, slowly, painfully, with the help of a therapist and a community and the fierce, unyielding love she felt for her daughter, how to ask for what she needed. How to name her hunger without apologizing for it. How to be in a relationship with another person without losing herself in the process. Whether she will find love again, real love, the kind that is sustaining rather than depleting, the kind that asks as much as it gives, remains to be seen. But she is alive. She is present. She is no longer apologizing for the size of her heart. And that, in a world that punishes women for wanting too much, is its own kind of revolution.